This is the third episode of the Dev Different podcast, brought to you by the team here at CodeBuddy. This week, we are joined by a special guest, Sam from the DataPlant.com. Welcome, Sam.
Excited to be here. You know, I get to come on to a podcast with two gentlemen that's talking about a subject I like talking about all day. So let's chat.
We're wanting to talk about building a startup in the age of AI. So I guess kick us off. Tell us where your kind of journey is and how that's working for you.
Hey, well, I've had the honor of really coming into an industry that's been really burgeoning over the last decade. And I say last decade importantly. I know we might have all known about what's happened with OpenAI, with large language models, but the things that have really happened recently really have been brewing for the last 8 or 9 years prior. So I've had a chance to be at the forefront of a lot of these innovations throughout my career. I started off coming out of St. Louis, Missouri. Anybody that knows Nelly, knows the Cardinals, knows the Blues, knows the Rams, you might know a little bit about me. So I'm from St. Louis, but I'm now in Santa Barbara, California, another really beautiful place. And I've had a chance just throughout my career to travel the world, helping companies leverage AI in the business space. So business enterprise software use cases of how do we use not just AI by itself, but AI and a suite of tools to provide better customer experiences and ultimately drive more value in our customer base. So that's the lens that I have. And I think it's a really exciting one because one of the biggest areas of innovation that we've seen AI dominate over the last decade has been in the business world. Yes, we all got, I think they call it Snapchat filters, Instagram filters. Yes, there's been a great level of technology improvement when it comes to cars getting closer to self-driving. These are the things that we might have seen from a consumer perspective, but under the hood, there's been a whirlwind of change in the business industry and how companies leverage their data and use AI to process that data. And I'm here to share a little bit of what I've learned along the way, building technology to serve just that.
You mentioned the last decade, so like the development of these AI tools over the last decade, and kind of insiders in the industry know that AI didn't just start with ChatGPT dropped whenever it was, although like the public may feel that way. So tell me about like what has the last decade looked like? What were you working on early? Kind of what's been that, from the nuts and bolts perspective of the actual AI.
Yeah, so I'll age myself a little bit here. So when I was in college, so years wise, 2012-ish range for anybody who knows, there was a moment when we were being introduced to enterprise software. They call them ERP systems. Enterprise resource planning tools, or what became future in a sense, customer relationship management tools. So if anyone's heard of Salesforce, this was the big prominent tool that arose right when I was graduating. But what that looked like was I was still learning SAP. And for those who know SAP, to do development work in that platform, you had to use JavaScript. And so what that looked like from a role, from a needs of services, what kind of people needed to show up, you had to have a coder background. Well, this shift that's happening now is similar to a shift that was happening then. When I was graduating, I was learning how to code with JavaScript. Meanwhile, the world was leveraging Salesforce as essentially the WordPress for what WordPress did for blogs, Salesforce did for CRM, which is customer resource or customer relationship management. That shift meant I didn't no longer have to do as much coding. I needed to know how to manage these systems and their processes. And so that became a different set of skill sets that you had to show up with. That same thing is happening now with how interactions are happening with technology in general. So before, we might have used an OpenAI kind of technology. What it looked like was you had to develop. So the models that we're using today, large language models, et cetera, have been around for a long time. But the issue was the interface of that interaction was not commodified, meaning it wasn't put into a position where business users could leverage it. That's what we've seen emerge here. And the next revolution that we're seeing that essentially is a great analogy for that is that we're seeing that now, not just the business users, so not just like a Salesforce admin or a technical admin of some AI tool, anybody can talk to these tools. And so that move to the individual being able to leverage it is what we're seeing a part of that shift. And so just think about it. The technology has been around for a long time. What's different? The ability for people to interact with these technologies with less barriers to entry. When I was in college, the barrier to entry was you had to learn how to do JavaScript. So if I want to do any type of setup of a data table or do any kind of data transformations, that was the burden I had to have before I could actually get a role or even participate. That shifted to, as a Salesforce admin, yes, you don't have to know code as much, but you need to know all these different processes, how data flows between different tools, how to really integrate things, how to set up configurations. There's still a wealth of knowledge. This next shift is for everybody, where the average person, essentially, regardless of any type of configuration tools or know any type of coding, you'll be able to develop. Now, take that to this audience. You're a developer today. You might still know how to do things like React JS or set up your own full stack development projects, but that shift is going to come to you as well. Where, again, right now there's been some charlatans in the world where apparently, we was told and promised this was going to work. Well, I think it was one called Devin that was released. It was supposed to be the first AI, developer. It didn't pan out, right? It was coming to find out it was a little less of what was possible. But the real important thing is we don't have to be at the destination to be on that arc. And that's what we're on. And I'll speak a little bit more. If you're developing something and you're building platforms or any kind of use case with technology, the amount of lift to bring your idea to life is going to be infinitely smaller over the coming months.
It's really interesting. I was reading Walter Isaacson's book about like the coming of the digital age and how that was kind of an amalgamation of a whole bunch of different people, working to build this thing that we call the internet. But it kind of includes the histories of computing in general in there. And it's interesting how like every major innovation or like technological leap in the computing industry has basically made it so that it's easier and easier for the common man to build software or to interact with computers, right? Because it used to be that you had to have a room-sized computer, right? So you had to have access to it and you had to know how to punch cards. And then, you had to, after that, there was command line based stuff and you had to know how to navigate the command lines. And then along came the graphical user interface. And now normal people can use and understand computers. And so I think you're right. I think that AI and the transformation that we're seeing is kind of like it. I don't know that it's necessarily the end of that. Like, because as you pointed out, we still have to do work. We still have to do, fixing errors. We still have to glue stuff together, yada, yada. Like we still have to build software. But it certainly feels like, it's getting to the point. One of the quotes that I had said on another podcast is like, it's getting closer to the day where the best idea wins. And there's no kind of gap between, having a great idea and implementing it. And I think too, like you mentioned, like the commodification of it coming to the marketplace. And that's totally true. And I think the other piece of that, which is going to be interesting over the next few years, was just like the hardware got there, like the chips, the GPUs, and the amount of data to make these large language models that, we theoretically knew were super powerful a long time ago, but we just didn't have the kind of meat behind it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out, over the next 2, 5, 10 years as the demand for AI grows. Like, how are we going to handle that from a power perspective? But
this is the long arc of humanity, right? I think we're still today proving some of Einstein's postulates true. And that's a testament to our ability to actually put these algorithms in place to verify the data maybe we might be getting from Hubble or for James Webb. And that's just an example in astrology. There's this dance that happens. The ideas, the innovation of the thought is usually followed up with the physical ability to prove. And that is something that, to your point, as we lower the cycles, we all win. But I'll be giving some cheat codes today, because if you're developing something, this is a better time to be alive. I think if you maybe was born, right before 2000, when the .com, you might have had a decent run, but the technology was nowhere near there. So ideas were stifled by the internet's capabilities. So that's a real world example that everyone can relate to of why so many businesses that had ideas at that time failed. We're at that other precipice when it comes to AI. The most grandiose, the real game changing, because right now stuff is nice, it's really cool, it's great for demos, but real world application of AI is still elusive for most applications due to the unreliability, due to the cost of modeling scale. Like, again, we've all been subsidized. Like, to be honest, we're in a phase that might or might not make it. And I think the reason why is because the cost to run these models right now is really low. This is the same thing that happened with Uber and delivery foods. They lowered the prices when the money printing was popping. Now that the money printing ain't popping no more, are you guys ordering Uber Eats as much as you were?
Nope.
I don't think so. And there's a reason to that. That same thing is happening here with AI architecture, where it's being extremely subsidized so that everyone can get on these platforms. It's a race to the bottom as long as we can get market adoption. But at some point, the tide is going to rise and the cost to deliver these things is going to be really high. Basic ideas that were really cool now, even something like a Chat GPT store, might not financially make sense. And that's why we're seeing things like the pivot of AI taking place from consumer use cases. Now they're trying to tie it to your operating system so it can run locally, right? These are some of the challenges that regardless of where you are, what you're building, you're not in a vacuum. You're a part of an industry that has its own macro factors that are influencing your outcomes. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to get all the reasons and things you need to know to be successful.
Yeah. Let's dive into that. So you said you got some cheat codes, or, we are the Dev Different podcast. So there's no assumptions that are unquestionable here. So yeah, what do you got? What are your top, what do you want to tell to the people? Yeah.
We about the arm block. We about the, necktie, all them. You put in any UFC reference you want for every concept. Let's start with some of the basics. Agile development. Mm-hmm. This is one that's been just told to you is this is going to help everything. The biggest problem with some of the things I'm going to share today, yes, they're controversial. Someone's going to say, Sam, you're crazy. Yeah, you got your company DataPlant. You're changing the world in your space, but that's not going to work for everybody. What I'd say to you is it's the only way forward. Let me give you some of the reasons. The biggest underpinning problem of all the things I'm going to share today is the rate and pace of innovation. The rate and pace of innovation is so much faster now that any of these principles we've been told aren't going to be able to stand the test of time. Now, going back to Agile development, the reason behind Agile development was with costs limited, so we don't have infinite money, and then with architectures needing maintenance, so anything you build needs to be maintained, being able to build modular separate pieces that are not connected is critical to be able to have a tool that can be maintained and then costly to upkeep. Mm-hmm. That core concept is best for anyone that kind of thinking at a base level. It's just like if you had an Excel file and you had one column that links to the other one. You know, in that moment when you link two columns together and it starts to say it can't compute because you have a circular logic, that was the core concept underneath why Agile would be valuable, because if you have modular elements that come together, they can be troubleshooted and fixed. And you don't get in these crazy loops of breakage, meaning where something broke here, that breaks here, that breaks there, that breaks here, and you're in this rat race loop. The complexity of merging systems is not unique to software. It has more to do with empathy and dynamics of physics. Anybody heard of the butterfly effect? Mm-hmm. And so Agile, from a financial perspective, does try to lower costs, but also from a physics dynamic, since we're creating these systems digitally, they still follow the laws of thermodynamics. And that core concept of I need to be able to troubleshoot these features, make sure that they're working, trace back issues, it makes sense to separate out these technologies or any elements of your technology. The problem and why that doesn't work today is it's going to take you too long to bring things together that are bigger than the sum of their parts because the pace of innovation is too fast. And so if you think about it, there's more startups than ever. We're coming out of the COVID era. So more people are disillusioned in the idea that I can just go get a 9-to-5 job and everything will be cozy. Have you heard about layoffs? Oh yeah, they're not going to tell you, they're just going to let you go. So, and you might do it kind of like Squid Games where everyone gets a number. Next thing you know, go check your laptops. You might have a job or not. So the certainty concept that was taught to us doesn't stand up anymore. And so that added to a lot of people. And then the fact that we got COVID in general, everyone was inside their houses. All you guys have been developing, you probably dev different, right? So you've been working on your stuff, getting your stuff together, and you're in a position now where more people than ever have ideas or platforms or use cases that they begin to put together. So regardless, you're racing a larger pack than ever before. Then add on top of that, like the additional layer to that, we are 4 or 5, maybe 6 generations into the revolution of software in general. Since we moved from on-prem to SaaS software, so you've got multiple companies that have had exits that have generated a series of people that have some funds and then do their next exit to do their next exit. So there's just a wealth of demand of and supply of people to put stuff together. So that idea of I'm just going to agilely put something together, and at the end they're all going to work to be bigger than the sum of their parts is an assumption that doesn't hold the same anymore. And so the companies that actually build cohesive, integrated platforms, yes, they're more complex. Yeah, they might be harder to manage. Those solutions will have a better impact in the market because they'll be more well put together. And it's that kind of approach that, again, puts more burden in how we define our requirement, how we define how our systems will work together. Because, again, regardless of what you're doing, you're mixing some form of business processes or technical processes with randomness to create some emergent experience. That technology or that cornerstone of that to be successful is adopting a process that doesn't work in an agile format, but works in an integrated format. And it's that kind of work that then is more complex. It's harder to bring to market. It's harder to maintain, but it'll give you a platform that can stand the test of time versus other tools that are just trying to build their piece by piece to get there. And they might not ever get there.
It's a hot take. It's a warm take. I'll say that, right? Because it's not, you're not alone in kind of voicing the, maybe Agile isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And I'm kind of on the fence. I think one of the things too that's at play is, with AI, and you see things like Elon laying off 80% of the software engineering workforce at Twitter, and then you see people speculating about when are we going to have the first $1 billion unicorn company that's built by one person. Agile is designed to help organize the efforts of larger-ish groups of developers in some way that you can at least guarantee some amount of end state, right? It's really about like peace of mind, because there was a period where software delivery was rough, right? And you just didn't know what you were going to get. So Agile was this way to kind of put a cap on it and say like, well, at least we know we're going to get X, Y, and Z every sprint. But I think one of the dynamics here at play too is that with the advent, it's not just AI either, but increasingly capable and integratable component libraries and clouds that are super easy to spin up web applications and things like that. Like, you just don't need as many people developing software. And there comes a point where your teams are small enough that like the kind of rigidity of something like Agile is just unnecessarily complicated. You wouldn't run Agile as a one-person shop. I mean, maybe you would, but you wouldn't get any benefit from it.
No, you're spot on. And you look at that in, parallel industries. And that's why I recommend everybody here, step outside of your zone. No matter what you're building, we're all, from our brain perspective, tapping into the ether of ideas. And there's some industry that any piece of your idea is their main course. So for you, it might be the fries. But in this other industry, it's the burger. So for them, they got to go deeper in those concepts and ideas. And so an example for this that I leverage and I look to a lot is the video game industry. The biggest, hugest, largest games are trash. AAA has gone down the hill primarily due to the focus on microtransactions, which is another story we'll talk about. But it's mainly because of the Agile framework. You don't get a truly emergent experience that is handcrafted and special when you have these mechanized structures like an Agile development team. You get a better approach if you have maybe 6 or 7 people that are really passionate about something and hyper integrated, because the systems that we create are really the legacies of our work. And we can't get too caught up in how and not to understand the what. The what and why we deliver is where you win the wars. And what I mean by it is, when we look at the proliferation of technology and the ability to bring technology to market, how is really just a means to an end. Do I use this library? Do I leverage this architecture? Do I bring in this type of process? Those all only matter as much as the output and the utility of that output. And so if you can make a more elegant solution, it's evolution, baby. The simpler products or simpler technologies or simpler life forms still exist. Yes, a complex human works, but you know how much it takes for us to work properly? Mm-hmm. You got to have society, language, fire, agriculture. I mean, the list goes on just to have the basic running operating system for a modern day human. Let's not even talk electricity, right? So all these systems are like layers on a cake that make the surface possible. If your platform and your solution can deliver the same utility and value with less layers of the cake, it's a more elegant solution. You can survive and thrive. And so that's where I get to some of the other elements that, again, are still produced, still posted as the way to go that aren't exactly true. And today, a lot of people are being led astray by following them. I talked about Agile. When we jump back, I'll talk a little bit more about the next one, which is how to build a business.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hey, so with that said, let's take a story time for a second. There's a thing that we all have looked at and seen in our experience. We all had to go communicate the value we can bring to get a job or to work in the marketplace. In that experience, we either went and learned some talents, some skills, went and started a job as like an intern and gathered those skills on the job. At some point, we came away with something we can offer the market. Now, take that analogy and put it to the business. What's been taught in business is, and again, this is where there's a disconnect. In real life, as a human, you want to acquire as many skill sets that are complementary. And you don't want to just be a jack of all trades in most scenarios. You want to have some strength, but you need at least a good mix of skill sets to be successful. In business of developing applications, the prevailing concept that's being taught is start with something small. Start with something really small, that's really simple thing, and then scale your business out on that. Again, that concept works when the pace of innovation is small. What I've seen as a person who's founded AI in this current time frame, what you saw was a proliferation of companies that right when large language models were created, essentially, the new release of large language models today, what they did was they went and said, you know what, we're going to use those to process your documents. You know what, we're going to use that to read your meetings and take notes. That the idea was something really small, high utility. The problem with that idea is most really simple, small things have low moats. And what I mean by it is there's not much of a barrier for someone else to enter and do it. So yeah, you could even get a bunch of people doing or using it, but how are you going to keep your space as a player in that market when anybody can quickly spin up a large language model? And then hello, OpenAI just made those things for free. So what happened was, if you tried to build an entire business on these ideas, you could, in the past, go reach an investors, sell the idea, get them to buy in, go to market, do all that jazz. Now, you are so quickly made obsolete that business model might not even be viable. By the time you bring that to market and say you even got 100,000 users, those people are going to flake on you. And so we see this also in the game industry with first-person shooters. There's been some proliferation of a ton of different tools, just every different type. You got hero shooter, you got real life World War, you got everything under the sun. But what's happened? The Call of Duties of the world have taken up all the space, and most of these projects, some of them funded for $7 million. If you just go look up first-person shooters that have been closed down the last year, you'll see that in the gaming industry, that's a perfect example of what's happening in AI. All these companies essentially raised millions of dollars because the investors were still thinking this was the old days. But what they realized is that there's no place to land. I've now raised these millions of dollars off this simple idea, but I have no ability to retain my customers, and I have no moat in the space. And so this is another example where the pace of innovation has made it to where the principle of starting small, and again, couple that with agile development, everything that you're doing is not going to guarantee that you'll have a viable opportunity on the other side of it. And again, that's just one other example. Another one I'll dig into when we come back a little bit more is how do we actually value market presence? Because you can have a series of people using your platform and still never reach a profitability moment. But I digress before I go too far. Back to you guys.
So you need to build a moat big enough. But to do that is usually a lot of time, effort, energy, money. So the whole idea of doing like a minimum viable product, something small to start, is so you can at least test out that there's something there, and then you can start doubling down. But don't you put yourself at a larger and larger risk if you just shoot for a much bigger target, a much bigger moat to start? And if you happen to be going on the wrong course, you could go for a longer amount of time with a larger amount of money on a product that has no actual validity or could go even further. How do you kind of balance that between building something that's going for the stars that can't quite be reached by others as easily, but also not going so far that you're lost completely?
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. If you're not shooting for the stars, what are you doing? And I think that's the biggest paradigm shift. The ideas are going to be wrong for 99% of us. That's already today. So with the current paradigm, most businesses fail. And so this idea that if I just start small, it's going to work out for me ain't a panacea itself. So if you look at the current landscape of what happens with startups, how many divorces, heart attacks, every bad outcome you can imagine already today with that paradigm. And so what I'm saying to you is the approach of going after something that shoots for the stars is your only viable option to hit the stars. Now, here's why. Most of us are going to fail anyway. That's just the nature of the game. You're going to be wrong, but you have to be willing to be wrong to be right and be really right. And so what I recommend is people follow what I found to be my best success in really bringing products to market. And that's having a founder fit. Now, I know I'm using a term that's kind of unique to building startups. So again, for those that are just doing dev work on the side, bear with me a little bit. The idea of founder fit as a strength means you've done something in an industry or you've done something in a space that gave you some unique revelations that you can leverage to then build whatever you want to build. There's all different ways to have strength. You can say, hey, I have patents, or I have, a great go-to-market, or I have a good market. My brand is really big. There's all kind of ways to do it. I like founder fit because it helps you truly understand some pain or use case that you can optimize. This will increase your odds. As I tell you, for those that might not remember, there was a tool not quite like Vine, but it was called Quibi. For those that don't remember, it was supposed to be the new version of short-term shows. They raised close to maybe $700 million, something like that, some crazy number. Do anybody ever use Quibi?
Right.
So my point that I'm making is like these ideas are essentially fear tactics. Stay small because you don't want to go out there and do too much too far. The only way you're going to really conquer a space and have a moat is if you reach for a far opportunity. But the best way to improve your odds is to have an experience in something, because that will allow for you to have an understanding that makes you make sure, because nothing's guaranteed, but you can raise up the possibility of you actually striking gold on something by having that real world experience. But if you don't take what I'm saying to you and you continue to go that route, the thing that you're walking into is the buzzsaw of competition and the buzzsaw of innovation. Your idea is going to be made obsolete. Have you seen the last 6 months? I mean, just from OpenAI's releases alone, if you made a startup in the last year, there's a high viability that if you did anything with natural language processing, you're trying to figure it out. And so the idea that I'm going to make some funds now to sacrifice my future is a hard proposition to make. Because in the past, you might have had two things. One, the liquidity of investment was lower, so I could just raise more money. That was the idea. Okay, I could just raise more money. And then I'll get to the next stage. I got customers, so I'll be all right. I'll figure it out. And just kind of crash and burn through the experience. And this is seen in the form of, to get to $0 to $1 million is one burden. To get from 1 million to 5 million is another burden. And then going from 5 to 10 is another burden. They have real issues with this because for the most part, you're burning up a lot of your market just to get to each stage. And you got to change the nature of your business. And so like in general, regardless of what you do, the approaches that we're using today are highly inefficient, not just with capital, but with market presence. Because you spend so much time making a simple product that's not quite that good, that's not quite perfect. Most of your customers, are generally not super happy. They're kind of somewhat in the middle of happiness, and you're losing so many customers a month. And so like this model only worked when you could get more money to keep it going. With that now being tighter, you have to rethink everything there. And then the other part of this is when you're developing a solution, when you're bringing a platform to life, the architectures that you work with didn't change as fast. There's a new library that can make your whole concept obsolete coming out in a month. Say you did something around time series modeling. If you built any kind of time series modeling using any type of open source technologies 2 years ago, your model would perform at 70% of the performance of the modern ones that just came out 2 months ago. So that's, again, just an estimation of that impact. So the problem is with innovation at every level being faster, that prospect of you getting to the viable destinations you want and being able to have a moat or be successful for ability to have a business or an opportunity It's just not what it was back then, back in the 2010s, and even before in the 2000s.
If you look at some of the businesses and the amounts of money that they raised during the dot-com boom, it was absolutely obscene amounts of money in their, in the currency of that time, right? And the things that they were building as a technologist now, like a software engineer, you're like, I could have built that in like a weekend, right? So like as the, to your point, as the speed of innovation, or just like the speed of development, the rate of change of the status quo gets faster and faster and faster. I think what you're saying, Sam, is that you have to amp up your own kind of intensity factor of what is the coolness, or the, the effectiveness, or the capabilities that you're bringing to market correspondingly. Because if you're still making, the same 2015 sized changes to the status quo with your product, things are changing a lot faster than they were back then.
Spot on. And all of our brains are integrated in a way that I think people discount. Yes, we are unique individuals, but our ideas come from the broader ether of possibility of human thought. You can't think up something that doesn't exist within the possibilities of your ability to think it. Now, that sounds like a really circular logic. But what I mean is, any thoughts that you can come up with, we're all somewhere on the spectrum. What I mean by that spectrum is your idea ability to think ahead might be 5 years in advance. I personally found generally where I've operated is like, I'll have an idea, then 5 years later, I'll generally see it in real life. And that's been just since I was young. It's always been kind of a thing. And for me, I knew there was probably somebody that had that idea 10 years in advance. There's someone that has it 20 years, right? We're all on different spectrums in different areas. But to that point, your concept or ability to bring up an idea and be creative is what's the gold right now. Creative thinking in the world of AI is the superpower that will let all people win. And what I mean by that core concept is, since people are going to be able to think more quick with shortcuts called AI, right? Whether what Google has done for us to be able to search for things, it's great because it's made it easier for us to get to questions and answers, but it's lowered our ability to think critically. That's going to extend now to reasoning. So people's ability to think creatively is going to be one of the big things that help you separate yourself and drive value. An example, I was in the airport speaking with my CTO maybe 8, 9, maybe a year and a half ago. And we were looking at, okay, large language models today, where does it go in the future? How do we innovate? How do we put ourselves on the farther side of that? And one of the ideas that I was, spitting off was, what if you had, instead of individual large language models, you had a community of different models from different vendors that can come into a room, be given a goal, and then they can tackle that goal together. Similar to like if they were playing Uno, each one lays out its idea, its concept, the other one can pick it up, change anything within the card set, put it back down, they can hand it over, they can have a conversation. For me, I thought of it like ants, right? Any one ant isn't quite that smart, but together, a series of ants can have emergent behavior that's a super intelligence. That's the idea that I had a year and a half ago. I'm now seeing those technologies arrive today. Andrew Nog, which got really familiar, anybody might know as a technological leader here in the market, he's now part of a firm that's doing something similar to that. And I use that as an example of, again, this idea of, okay, these large language models exist. Someone else has tested that. They did some studies where they looked at the initial versions, so like ChatGPT, 3 kind of level stuff across a series of human tasks, had 80% efficacy. So you take a bunch of human tasks, take the average of how well they performed, 80%. These more tailored versions of GPT, so like, you take one and you really stylize it to be a certain persona, have some certain level of history, some examples, all that kind of jazz, they've gotten up to around 90%. These AI community solutions essentially have gotten up to 98% efficacy. And here's where it gets crazy. It's the wild, wild west. There's no rule on what different types of personalities or AI roles that you could put in a room to get an outcome. I could put one that's a strategist, one that's a banker, and then one that is a police officer, and ask them to solve a problem around banking. And you might get a viable solution that's better than if you just had all banking AIs in there.
Yep.
There's no rules. And so I'm just asking you, I'm demanding you, dev different.
it kind of fundamentally changes. Like, I think a micro version of it is when the market went from relational databases to like NoSQL, right? There's like you have to shed however many years of constraints that you put on the way that you think about doing databases in order to kind of step in and take advantage of the full technologies, or the full capabilities of that new technology. And I think you're seeing the same thing on a much grander scale with AI, because like the difference is not, like how do I write upgrade scripts, right? The difference is like nobody knows the theoretical ceiling of the capabilities of these things, right? And like you said, like what is the capability of a single ant versus a million ants, right? What is that quotient, right? A lot, way more than a million. There's been a bunch of studies where you can quantitatively prove that the sum of the parts of a well-organized team is much greater. The sum of the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts, right? And so it really is like true blue sky creative thinking that I think is going to win the day, because as you pointed out earlier, right, we all, like everybody that kind of came to discover these large language models at some point or another, right, there's always the first order ideas that come out, right? And that kind of goes to your point about the zombie sort of companies that everybody saw. And it's clearly a fly by night GPT wrapper that's not doing a whole lot besides delivering you a prompt, right? And so there's those first order things where it's like, oh, I could get this to, write me an email, or I could get this to listen to my meetings and summarize them or whatever. But obviously, no pain, no gain, right? If you thought of it in 30 seconds after you first discovered what large language models are, like, newsflash, nobody's that much better than anybody else, right? So yeah, it's fun, man, because there's so few constraints. And I think too, I'm intrigued what you kind of mentioned earlier about that idea of like, are we in a honeymoon period of large language model pricing, right? Like, are we currently in the dip before OpenAI is really going to crank down and try to make some money? And I'm curious as to your thoughts, especially as having worked with multi-agent, multi-model stuff. What is the kind of future for the importance of the open source, community-driven sort of alt models in kind of stabilizing that price market and not creating, crazy monopolies?
Yeah, there's no help in it. So the real example I go to that's really great, I think you brought up some really good elements that we can call back to. The architecture wars. Yes, there's a million software apps, but there's maybe about 5 architectures. Either you're an Amazon shop, you're a Google shop, or you have some type of open source structure, right? Like, there's only 3. So it's literally a George Carlin joke. You know what I mean? You have a million flavors of ice cream, but you only got 3 stores you can buy it from. Mm-hmm. And they all are part of the same conglomerate. You want Taco Bell or KFC? You think you hate Taco Bell and you love KFC, or you hate KFC, you love Taco Bell. Surprise, it's the same people. So that core issue is doubled on to the point that we're describing now, which is the honeymoon phase. Right now, and again, nothing against Amazon, Google, NVIDIA, all of them are giving away these startup programs where they're giving away $20,000, $100,000 free for your first 2 years building something. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is going to last forever?
The same history would certainly indicate not, right?
Yeah.
Like with Uber Eats.
Another factor to it that we haven't quite thrown into the factor, like when it was early, is something like government intervention or taxes too. Because I can see that going into it, where Amazon's early day online shopping, there was a huge competitive advantage because you didn't have to pay sales tax. Well, technically you were supposed to, but Amazon didn't. Most people didn't report it. So a disproportionate amount of online sales happened because of that difference in price, because I could save a minimum of 5 to 7% by always buying them on Amazon. We're seeing more and more with these large language models, both in where they're getting their sources, a lot of copyright claims and things like that, where they're actually gathering their information for learning, but also more influence now in the regulation front. You could see a time where there is some sort of tax structure either on acquiring the information going into the LLMs or getting the information out in forms of tokens.
Oh yeah, that's already happening. And you see that what companies are doing. So for those that don't know, underneath the hood, OpenAI used to have a model from a revenue perspective where it would just use as you go and they would charge you. They've now asked you to put in your money in advance. So you have, and it's just one example. Everyone's got a little bit different model. But what that's moving towards is a place where since you had to put in $50 up front, now I can tax you because it's a specific amount. There's an amount that's being used. You could do deltas. Versus before, it was not clear because, again, people use a different rates. Those rates vary. And so putting in a tax model is a little bit harder. So expect that to come. But even more so, one of the things that's really going on here is that the ability to lower the price and the cost is not something that's going to stop soon. Like there's still going to be cheaper and cheaper versions and ways they can make it cheaper because right now the models are ridiculously big. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for them to be that big. And the core concept that we're seeing that in is with Apple Intelligence. Again, why did they call it AI in their sense, right? They're trying to hijack the term. Now, we'll see if this goes the way of the touch bar, right, if it actually sticks. But I think there's something sticky to it from the core concept of we're going to do most of the processing on your main machine itself. So on-prem processing, and then we're going to outsource to a private cloud first. So Apple has its own cloud that's, again, a private cloud. I think they have a name to it. But again, this is kind of novel, right? It's a way of doing it to where we're lowering the cost. Because coming to our private cloud, we can lower some of the costs. We can control the cost structure. And then if we can't answer you on your device, and then in the private cloud, then we'll go to something like an OpenAI. Then we'll go to something like, Anthropic or Gemini or something like that. So that's an example of this people trying to make a progress in this space. But to do that, the real underlying problem is we need to move away from large language models. We need limited language models, which are tailored to solve specific discipline. That's going to make it more viable to then go into this world where you get higher efficacy overall through these emergent opportunities, like having a series of AI agents in a room to solve a problem. Right now, it's possible because it's super subsidized. But even then, it's way more expensive to put 6 or 7 AIs and have them have a deliberate conversation for 45 minutes in AI time, which is in the speed of light, right? So that amount of calls being made that give you a more viable, more robust solution is why AI can struggle today to write a whole game from scratch, right? If I gave you a GTA source code, remember when Grand Theft Auto was hacked and the source code was released? I see a future where AI will be able to read that entire code and rewrite any version of that game you want. Now, the reason why that can't be done today is one, the speed. So the speed of processing, that's a factor. We'll see what quantum computing does. But the other element of it is the cost. The energy cost running these models is ridiculous. Well, if we had, instead of a series of large language models that are all tailored, if we had limited language models that have limited scopes, overall the build is more efficient. So I'm a firm believer that the costs there's still orders of magnitude of cost we have to get down, but there's no incentive for companies overall to do that today, after this next wave. Because what's going to happen is all the players that are in it today, they're going to kind of solidify their niche, kind of where they play, and then there's going to be no competitive advantage. It's going to be like what Madden was for the NFL video game licensing. It used to be really good football games. Nothing against EA Sports, but these modern football games have been trashed for about 10 years. And it's also been reason why they've had private licensing for the last 10 years. So what are you seeing? Oh, yeah. With Microsoft, they're baking in OpenAI into Windows. Oh, yeah. What are you seeing? Apple Intelligence. They have their own in Apple, right? So as these become singular shops, and I know Amazon's got Bedrock, right? So just in general, as these become singular shops, and they might buy up the players so they have their own world, you're going to have less option, and that's when the prices are going to rise up.
Yeah, I just saw online today that Amazon's coming out with their own version of a ChatGPT competitor. So we're going to be seeing that here in the next few weeks, I imagine.
Not surprised.
I think I'm really interested too in because that is the status quo, that all these things are large and only able to be served by these, huge corporations with the kind of financial capital in the billions, But I am interested in seeing, cross applications, or I think it's Tiny Corp. They're building what is the most capable, awesome, AI machine that I can build that can be plugged into a 110 volt outlet and that is quiet enough to not be obnoxious to be in the same room with. Like that's their design constraints that they chose, which I think is super interesting, especially as you pointed out, as we start to make these models more efficient and purpose built. Like, what are we going to see in terms of your ability to kind of cut ties with these mega model hosting companies, and then also too, like I'm interested in how can we be more efficient with the energy as a society, right? So I saw another company that they were selling essentially heaters. I think they were marketing them as, but the heat element was processors, right? So it was like, if you use a space heater in the winter, right, you desire more heat in your house and you're willing to put your volts through it, right, and pay for the volts or whatever, then like we have a good way to generate this heat, which is we're going to run some Bitcoin mining or whatever they're doing on it. So I think there's some really kind of interesting things maybe to come in the next few years.
Oh, it's gonna be fun, man.
Yeah. So Sam, it's been awesome talking to you, man. I want to get your Cliff Notes short hitter version of, you talked a lot about kind of challenges to the status quo of different things, of Agile, of the size of kind of your functionality bites that you're taking, market presence. So give me your top 3 pieces of advice to somebody building a software company today.
Founder fit, number 1. Find a way to spend the time it takes to walk in the shoes of the people you want to serve. It will serve you immensely to be able to have that empathetic understanding of the needs of your customer. Now, that's just the foundation. On top of that, challenge the thoughts that think from a limited resource perspective. Because yes, we're finite. We only live on this planet for so long. But the ability for you to think without constraint will allow for you to think further and think bolder. Do that. And then lastly, the main element I think that I've learned building my company, DataPlant, is don't travel alone. We can do a lot individually. And yes, there will be a company that's got $1 billion company that's owned by one person. But there's so much value in leveraging people to experience with these types of journeys that you're going to be going on. It's going to be hard. Yes, people are infallible. Yes, people are unreliable. All that jazz, right? We have a lot of great thinkers that essentially move in silence or move by themselves when it comes to the development community. But I challenge that to flip and take that same principle and apply it to the open source. If you're in the open source world working on something, focus on making whatever project or space you're working in more welcoming to people that are new to that space. These things will not only give you a better chance of being successful, but give you a whole lot more fun doing it.
Absolutely. Well said. And so we always like to give people a chance to kind of plug themselves. So tell the people a little bit about where they can find you. What is DataPlant? What's the most exciting things coming up? Floor is yours.
Yeah, so Sam Cummings, you can find me online at, thedataplant.com. That's my company, DataPlant. We help companies with the biggest problem of our time in business, which is digital empathy, the ability to empathize with people at scale and deliver hyper-personalized message to drive those outcomes and really give them the best customer experience possible. That's where the wars will be won in business. If you have a better customer experience, you will be more successful. That goes for anything on the software side, all the way to the development experience. If you're building an SDK or a library or some APIs, the better that experience and being able to leverage it, the better it will be. I have a podcast as well. I'd love to bring you gentlemen on at some point. It's called AI for Diversity. AI, the number 4, diversity. You can find us on LinkedIn as well. We have 500,000 followers there. I'd love to have each one of you guys join. We can grow that number there. And then lastly, hey, you can find me directly, Samuel J314. That's my handle on LinkedIn. Let me know if you saw this episode, you like what you heard, and love to take a call with you and see what we can chat about together.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Sam, for joining us. Love the conversation. And thanks for everyone who made it to the end of the video.
Yeah, shout out to Matt. Shout out to Matt from Cultivation. He was the guy that plugged this. So double kudos to Matt.